hit play from start. And then I'm going to hit share my screen. Okay, so everybody should now be able to see this presentation. Is that right? Okay, awesome. So given that you all have already self-selected in to being interested in the Rhodes and Marshall scholarships, and given that consequently, all of you all will probably be coming to an information session explicitly about those scholarships in the coming days, what I want to do is give you a little bit of information about those scholarships in a way that's not going to cover or duplicate the content of the information sessions, while also drawing your attention to a couple other similar scholarships, some that the CRF plays a role in administering, some that you should seek out on your own. And then, because I think this will be the most useful way to spend our time together, given your confirmed interest already, I want to talk a little bit about the meta skills that make for a successful fellowship application. The things that you can do, the habits of mind that you can get into that will set you up for success in this Rhodes and Marshall season, but that are also generalizable pieces of advice that will make you a competitive applicant to any number of fellowships or fellowship-like experiences in the future. That's how we're going to divide our time today. And then after that, I'll field questions. Though you should feel free to interrupt at any moment if you have a specific question as well. So the title of this presentation today is Beyond the Standard Path, Graduate Outcomes with Impact. What is the standard path is the place I want to begin. I think there are many standard paths. I think there are standard paths that take us to the perfect. If you want to drop questions in chat, Colleen is monitoring that. There are standard paths that lead to law school, that lead to consulting, that lead to pre-med, that lead to a small range of options that many Georgetown students end up pursuing. There's nothing wrong with these options. In fact, many of them are exciting, engaging, lucrative, interesting ways to spend your time, right? But I think if you're thinking about fellowships, then you're already thinking about approaching your life and your career a little bit differently. And you're thinking about, how can I have an impact? How can I live a life that is guided by a mission, that is guided by a vision of the world that I want to instantiate? That's just a different mode of thinking about your future than the mode that says, how can I ensure that I'm financially secure? How can I ensure that I have a good job with good job security that will be interesting and intellectually demanding and has a clear progression path built into it, and so on and so forth? Those are questions you have to ask yourself regardless, right? But they don't have to be all the questions you ask yourself. You all are young, intelligent, ambitious, creative Georgetown students. Many of you have, through your extracurricular activities or through your academic performance, distinguished yourself further among your peers and place yourself in, at least along some axis, a very high level of performance. And why I want to talk to you today about fellowships at the object level, but about going beyond the standard path at the more abstract level, is because I think you all have more agency in shaping your own futures and in shaping the futures of the society and the world that we all live in than you realize. And raising your awareness of that agency and giving you practices that you can put to use to developing your own agency is the highest level goal that I want to get out of this presentation today. So let's jump into it and let's talk a little bit about fellowships, okay? What are you going to do with your life? That's the question that I want to be guiding your thoughts now. But What are fellowships? So fellowships are a range of things. They're funded opportunities to support study, to support work in a specific capacity, to support research. When we're talking about postgraduate fellowships, we're talking about funds that you would be given to support a specific activity for a extended duration following graduation, right? That specific activity can be research, it can be work, it can be pursuing a postgraduate degree, right? It can be a number of things. But the fellowship is the fund and the award that supports that. The fellowships we'll be talking about today are also competitive. So the difference between, for instance, just a fellowship and a grant is that a fellowship has a certain amount of competition involved with winning it, and that competition confers, in the case of a fellowship, there's many competitive grants as well, but the competition confers, in the case of a fellowship, some sort of prestige. The fellowship itself serves as a credential, and fellowships can be desirable for that reason. Though the way we're going to talk about making yourself competitive for these fellowships will require you to go beyond the fellowship's instrumental value as a credential and to think about how fellowships can serve you on your mission. So I've listed a number of fellowships here that I will talk about. And some of these, the CRF plays a very key role in administering. Others are just things that I think should be on your radar. So the ones that I have here, and this is just a small sample of the amount of fellowships that are out there, but these are some that the center has had at least some contact with. There's the Rhodes and Marshall scholarships. There's the Gay Cambridge Scholarship. There's the Knight Hennessy Scholarship. There's the Fulbright U.S. Student Program. There's the Paul and Davy Soros Scholarship for New Americans. There's the James C. Gaither Carnegie Jr. Fellowship. There's the St. Andrew Society in the state of New York Macmillan Scholarship. And there are scholarships from the American Scandinavian League. I just picked a smattering of ones that the CRF has either a very high involvement with or that we've had people successfully apply for in the past. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a couple of these now. So the first two, the two that you know well if you're on the Rhodes and Marshall listserv, are the Rhodes and Marshall scholarships. So if you've had an advising session with me, if you've had an advising session with Colleen, or if you've come to an information session in years past, you know what these are, right? These are highly competitive, nationally competitive scholarships that will fund for 2 years your study in the United Kingdom. The Rhodes will fund your study at Oxford. The Marshall Scholarship will fund your study at a number of UK universities. But the duration and the competition for these scholarships looks very similar. You will hear more about these scholarships than you ever imagined there was to know over the next coming months. But I bring them up first because I think that a successful Rhodes and Marshall candidacy requires you to develop the issue area orientation, the mission-led career ambition, all of these things that I think are generally important for fellowships. And I think what will work in a Rhodes and Marshall application, which is an application that you will be very thoughtfully developing over the next couple months, and in the event of your selection for internal nomination over a subsequent couple months after that, are widely applicable. Sometimes I'm asked, oh, does it make sense to spread my interests, right? To apply for Rhodes and Marshall and Fulbright, or Rhodes and Marshall and St. Andrews, or Rhodes and Marshall and one of the AFL scholarships, right? My answer almost always is yes. Every additional scholarship is going to be more work for you. That's true. It takes a lot of effort to put a scholarship application together. And as we'll learn together over the course of the workshops that you'll be completing in order to apply for internal nomination, and as you will learn in the event of your selection for an internal nomination over the course of the summer, even the Rhodes and Marshall will require of you a lot of specific work, a lot of stuff that is not transferable. But that said, I believe the kernel, right, the core of what makes you competitive for the Rhodes and what makes you competitive for the Marshall makes you competitive for all these other scholarships, and also serves as a valuable model for a way that you can approach your career generally, outside of the context of any individual scholarship. Moving on, to some other fellowships. So I've just put a smattering of scholarships and fellowships up here, and I'll talk about a couple of them, right? So there is the Gates Cambridge Scholarship. That's the one that's probably most akin to Rhodes and Marshall, and the one that I would encourage you to, unless you have an extremely strong reason not to, consider applying for, right? It's a scholarship that doesn't require institutional nomination, but will offer you the opportunity to fund study at Cambridge University. And so in that way, it's very similar to the Rhodes Scholarship and similar to the Marshall Scholarship, right? What they're looking for is similar, and the requirements are similar. It's 3 letters of recommendation like the Marshall. There's a couple of specific things about the Gates recommendations that are different. They want you to have a Gates recommender in addition to 2 sort of academic recommenders. But that's stuff that we can work out in advising if you're interested in applying for the Gates. I bring up the Gates because it really makes sense in a application suite that includes the Rhodes and the Marshall for most people. Another one that I think makes sense, and another one that's not up here, and I wonder if any of you guys are from the Fulbright listserv, because I reached out to people who are interested in Fulbright as well, is Fulbright. Now, Fulbright is a program that you probably have heard a lot about already if you've engaged with the center at all, right? We put up a lot of Fulbright applications every year, and we also win a lot of Fulbright grants. The Fulbright U.S. student program, though, shouldn't be conceived as a single scholarship opportunity like the Rhodes and the Marshall Scholarship is. Rather, it's a suite of various grants that can fund in over 140 countries, either independent research, graduate study, or will provide you an opportunity to assist in the teaching of English in classrooms at various levels. There's university level English and teaching assistantship Fulbrights, and there's, pre-secondary English teaching assistantship Fulbrights. There's a whole range. And those are just the main 3 categories. There are a number of specialized Fulbright grants beyond those that offer you further specialization. I would say that for anybody who is competitive for Rhodes and Marshall, right? And I would even go so far as to say almost for any Georgetown student, there is a Fulbright that is a good fit for you. And I would say that if you are considering applying for the Rhodes or applying for the Marshall, you should absolutely also consider the Fulbright U.S. student program, because it is an extraordinarily capacious program that contains within it so many grants, so many award types, so many cool opportunities, some of which I guarantee you will be both competitive for and will interest you. So my colleague, Bill Sasato, is the lead Fulbright advisor in the center. I encourage you to, if you're interested in Fulbright, sign up for the Fulbright listserv and complete the application form of the, not the application form, the advising form of the website to set up an appointment with him, because there is so much in the U.S. student Fulbright program that I think will be a great fit for you all, and it's something I encourage you to consider. Now, a couple of the other scholarships that I'm going to talk about now are more specific, right? There's the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans. If you are somebody who is new to America, then this scholarship could be potentially a good fit for you. It potentially targets people who are a little bit farther down in their careers. And so many people will go and do a Truman, a Rhodes, a Marshall, and then go on to do a Soros. But they're looking for very similar things to the Rhodes and Marshall as well. They're looking for somebody who has an ability to make an impact, a vision for change, somebody who is mission-led. It fits very well into the same groove as Rhodes and Marshall. And if you're successful in applying for Rhodes and Marshall, the Soros is definitely something that should be on your radar. Another one that should be on your radar, I'm now realizing that there might be some sophomores in the house. Is there any sophomores here? Okay. In that case, I won't bring up Truman, but that's another one that should be on your radar. These other ones are a little bit smaller, stuff like Princeton in Africa, American Scandinavian Foundation, and the St. Andrews Scholarship. Those have additional qualifications. Stuff like American Scandinavian Foundation, I think is just a super underapplied organization that will fund your study in Scandinavian countries. The St. Andrews Scholarship is something similar. It's underapplied to, if you have any Scottish heritage going back even to a great grandparent, it will fund a year of study in Scotland. It's basically like Scotland's Mitchell. Well, it was like Scotland's Mitchell, but the Mitchell is now on pause. So it's an opportunity like the Mitchell, like the Marshall, like the Rhodes to complete study in the UK, right? But unlike all of those, I think there's a smaller applicant pool. And because of that, heritage criterion, which again is very minor. If you have any sort of Scottish blood in you at all, you're eligible to apply for this scholarship. It makes it a really sort of appealing scholarship. The other one that's not on here that you should consider is Knight Hennessy, right? So that is a scholarship that will fund your study at any of Stanford University's graduate programs. You can do an MBA with that. You can do a JD with that. You can do a PhD with that. And it will give you very generous funding towards completing that degree. It's also more business friendly than these other scholarships. I think a lot of these fellowships have a slight bias against people who have sort of, done the consulting, thing, done the business thing. You can't get, for instance, support from Rhodes or Marshall to do an MBA, or at least you can't, except in certain extenuating circumstances. You can with the Rhodes conditionally, the Marshall doesn't permit it. And you can't get a degree in financial economics through the Marshall. That's another criterion. But the Stanford MBA is got a huge cohort of Knight Hennessy scholars. So if you're somebody who is super interested in this social impact, this mission-driven life, all this stuff that I'm talking about today, but you really want to go into the private sector, well, the Knight Hennessy is something to consider, right? It might be a better fit for you. And that last word, fit, is something I want to dwell on a little bit more, right? Because we're a small center, right? We're really small. And we do a lot. We advise on a lot of scholarships, on a lot of fellowships. We administer the undergraduate research support process. And as a result, our advising capability and even sort of our coterie of fellowships that we know a lot about is this big, right? But the range of what is possible is much more expansive than that. And like I said about the Fulbright US student program, that's true more generally as well. If you are somebody who's competitive for Rhodes and Marshall, if you are somebody who is competitive for the US Fulbright student program, if you're somebody who's competitive for the Soros Fellowship, for the St. Andrews Fellowship, for the Gates Cambridge Scholarship, then there is funding opportunities out there for you to do what you want to do, right? And it's a matter of you knowing what you want to do and finding those opportunities, right? And we can try and be your thought partners in figuring out what those opportunities are for you. But at the end of the day, there will always be more out there than what we know about. And there will always be more out there than what we can advise you on. And so what I want to direct your attention towards, right, before we start on this process of narrowing down, right, and thinking about Rhodes and Marshall, because that'll be your life over the next couple months. And in the event of your selection for an eternal nomination, that'll be your life for the next 6 months, right? It will be a process of narrowing down. Before we do that, I want you to realize that the possibilities are much vaster than either Colleen or I know, and more than you know right now. And what I want to spend the rest of this presentation talking about are the meta skills that will enable you to find that opportunity, to get to that scholarship that is going to fund the thing that you want to do, that is going to be that perfect fit, right? Even beyond what might seem like all these scholarships that we know about and that the CRF advises on are in their own way standard paths that you might have to go beyond in order to find the opportunity that's going to work for you. So now what I want to talk about is the high-level qualities that, when you follow them downstream, make you competitive for any individual scholarship, but then also make you capable of living the kind of life that these scholarships want to encourage their recipients to live. And I think the key desideratum, if you're looking to be competitive for these scholarships, over and above GPA, over and above extracurriculars, over and above any specific thing that you can do, is having at the core of all your activities, right, a mission. Okay? What do I mean by a mission? You know, corporations have missions. They make these lovely mission statements. You know, Georgetown has a mission, you know, we're called to be all these things. We see it on flyers when we're walking around campus, right? What is a mission? A mission is, for our purposes today, a specific thing that you want to realize, guided by a specific set of values that you hold, right? Some change that you want to see enacted in the world, that you are going to push and push for over the course of your career, right? Something that is bigger than, again, your own financial security, right? Something that is bigger than something like prestige, right? Something that is tangible, that is measurable, that is in a way a goal, that is conceivably achievable. That's a mission, right? And what I want you guys all to leave this presentation today feeling, what I want you all to feel as you go into this arduous process of application for the Rhodes and Marshall Scholarship, is that you are all people who are capable of leading a mission-led life, right? Of conceiving of a change you want to see in the world and realizing that change, you know? It gets to sound a little bit inspirational speakery when it's phrased like that, right? But what I really want to exhort you, and what I really want to say, is that you guys are not typical. You guys are not ordinary, right? Even the most ambitious students that I've worked with very frequently still fall short in their estimation of what they are actually capable of, right? The students who are applying for these scholarships, each and every one of you, you know, you're amazing. You're inspiring. I learn so much every year. And if every year, if there's something that I want to say to the people going into this process, it's that you're capable of more than you know. And I can't even say that without it sounding like a platitude, without it sounding like something that is said in a sort of inspirational speech, right? But what I want to leave you guys with today is that a mission-led life for you all is something that is very reasonable for you to want to lead. And let's talk about some strategies for actually accomplishing that. So I think the key to living a mission-led life is to developing your sense of agency, right? Developing your sense that you are somebody who has some power in shaping your own future. I think when you come to Georgetown, when you come to an elite university, right, arrayed before you are a number of moving walkways, like you're in Heathrow Airport, right? And you can, if you want, step on any one of those walkways and they'll take you, if you stand still, to somewhere that you want to go, right? You'll end up somewhere, and the place that you'll end up will be great. It'll probably be your terminal, right? There'll probably be a Wagamama in the terminal where you can get, you know, sort of vegan katsu ice cream or something, right? But the point of this presentation is that I want you to think more expansively. I want you to think very thoughtfully about what walkways do I want to get on, right? And do I want to get on a walkway at all, you know? And I think developing agency is a key to that, right? And so I've broken developing agency down into sort of three things, right? And they're going to sound pithy and they're going to sound basic, but when we unpack them, I hopefully will reveal to you all that these are all sort of operationalizable first, and second, they're more complicated than they might appear. So the first thing I think you can do to develop agency is to understand the true size of your option space. I'm gonna nail that down in a second, right? And the second thing is to have goals and then to do things. And we're going to talk about what having goals and doing things entails in a little bit. So what do I mean by understanding the true size of your option space? Well, that's getting beyond the standard path. That's the heart of the presentation today, If you're already considering Fulbright, if you're already considering Rhodes and Marshall, if you're considering opportunities like Teach for America, Peace Corps, if you're considering, going out and working for a startup, if you're thinking about, working for a boutique consultancy, right? You're already expanding your option space. You're already going beyond the simplest opportunity. If you're pre-med, if you're considering an MD PhD program, if you're thinking about, DO programs, if you're thinking about dental school, right? If you're thinking about different ways to get to the place that you want to be, you're already expanding your option space. But the thing I'd like to raise your awareness about today is that probably you have more options available to you than you realize, right? This is the moving walkways thing, because there's certain paths that feel extraordinarily legible, right? It's very clear what you have to do to get into law school. I have to get this LSAT score. I have to maintain this GPA, right? And I have to, apply to a bunch of law schools and hope I get in somewhere, right? There's these legible paths that are very attractive because of their legibility. But you all, and this is what I want to convince you of, have the abilities, have the creativity to think up a new future for yourself, right? And people will dismiss this. People will, not consider the full range of options available to you, right? Anything that deviates from the natural intuitive pathway is sort of anathema to a lot of people's spirit, and truly, I think, to something core about Georgetown, but I think if you really take a moment and ponder it, right, there's ways that there's a lot more available to you than you would think. So take the example of going to the UK, or take the terminal example, right, of, say you are a fellowship applicant who is interested in sort of implementing new changes to early childhood education, okay? So you have a vision for change in educational policy in the United States, okay? And you're a Georgetown student, okay? You want to make that change, right? But you, for instance, you don't have the best GPA and you don't have any experiences in that field, okay? So if you're thinking in a limited option space way, you might think, oh, well, I don't have the experiences, right? There's people who know more than me, There's people who, have been doing this their whole lives. Like, who am I to do this, right? That's one way of thinking, right? But if you think more expansively, if you expand the size of your option space, you can think, okay, well, what can I do, right? Maybe I can reach out to a lead researcher, you know what I mean, in the early childhood education space and just sit down and have an informational interview. Maybe I can do a bunch of reading beforehand to impress that person enough that they will, take me on as a research assistant. And then I can relay that research assistantship into a sort of maybe less competitive fellowship that will let me, go to an American city and do work in this field for a year. And maybe off the back of that fellowship, and I can apply for a Rhodes and Marshall scholarship, which will get me in the rooms that I want to be in to talk to more people who are interested in education policy. And then I can come out of that experience, right, working in the field that I want to be in, right? So even though right now I'm a senior with like a 3.4 or something, right? Or a junior with a 3.4, even though I don't have any experience in educational policy, right? Maybe there's more ways that I can think about this that'll still get me to the place that I want to go, right? And that's basically the story of, one of our recent Marshall winners. And I think the people who are successful in these fellowships are always the people who can think widely about their option space, okay? So it's great to say, think more widely about your option space. That's a great command, right? But how do we actually do that? Okay, here's a couple of heuristics that I found work for me, and there will be a number of other ones that, I don't touch on that may work for you, right? So the first thing that you can think of is, often I find if I'm coming up against something that feels hard, right? Or I want to count myself out of a competition, what do I tell myself? I'm like, well, there's people who've been doing this their whole life. There's people who have done X, there's people who have done Y, there's people who have done Z, okay? Well, X, Y, and Z, maybe you can't be a person who's done this their whole life, right? But if X is like having an internship in the field and Y is taking some classwork related to the field and Z is having some connection to the field, well, you just laid out 3 things that you should probably do, right? So if you think about what your imagined ideal competition is doing, you should ask yourself, well, is there any of those things that I could do, right? Is there any of those things that I would dread somebody else doing, right? Because it would count me out of a competition that I, in fact, can do. That's one way of thinking about it, Another way of thinking about it is, don't think about necessarily like, an adversary or opposition or an enemy doing those things, but think about what would I advise somebody in my position? If somebody was just dropped magically out of the sky, right? And they were like, I want to make change with respect to education policy. What would I advise them, right? Not knowing the sort of, their constraints, not knowing what they are not capable of. I'd be like, you would probably propose to them a more ambitious suite of opportunities than you yourself would want to carry out. Oh, well, you're interested in education policy. Have you reached out to everybody who's like locally doing that, right? Have you talked to people in local government and asked them if you can like sit in on their sessions about this stuff, right? Have you thought about starting an organization that addresses this kind of thing, right? Where are the gaps in education policy? Have you identified those, right? Who is working on meeting those gaps? Can you reach out to them, right? I think if you do this sort of like, almost like, if you do this sort of counterfactual advising, you will be able to sort of identify a program of things that sound really exciting. It's like, oh yeah, well, why don't you do that? 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 And if you're just asking yourself those questions, all of those things might feel impossibilities. But if you would advise it to somebody else, then conceivably it's something you should do as well. I'll give you another example and then we'll move on, right? Think about, say that your terminal goal is just going to the UK to study, right? Well, what you can do is the option that presents itself is applying for the Rhodes and Marshall Scholarship. Sure. Okay. So you do that, you don't get an interview. All right. Does that mean you aren't going to get to go to the UK? Conceivably, yes, right? But the habit of mind that I would like you to encourage, develop, right? And the thing that's going to serve you well over this application period is not stopping at this first hurdle, right? Because you've exhausted the available moving walkways. Yes, that was the easiest way to do it, but there are a million other ways. Cambridge website has a scholarship finder that lists 500 scholarships, over 500 scholarships that will fund your study at University of Cambridge. Maybe one of those is workable for you. If none of those are workable for you, right, then there are sort of individual studentships and individual scholarships that are administered by the department and administered by Cambridge generally that many Cambridge students are available to avail themselves of. Okay, so that's not possible, right? Well, is there a possibility to, go out, work, save up money, and then go to the graduate school, right? That's a possibility as well. Okay, what about a paid role as a research assistant of the professor that I would like to work with as a way into that graduate opportunity? That's an option as well, right? What about reaching out to, sort of like the department directly and explaining my financial situation, right? Many of those things won't work, right? Many of those things won't present themselves as paths. Probably 499 of the scholarships listed on Cambridge's path page won't work for you, right? But if one does, then you've accomplished your goal, right? I think this is a process, the one that you're about to undergo, that can cause you to develop plans for your future that are in some way fragile, right? You start to think, oh, it would be so great if I could go to Oxford and be a Rhodes Scholar and then, meet such and such person and then come out of that and do X and Y, right? At the beginning of this process, what I want you to think about is how can I make as much as possible my plans for my future anti-fragile? How can I still get to the goal that I want to get to, even if this doesn't work out, and even if plan B doesn't work out, and even if plan C doesn't work out, right? That's what I mean by expanding your option space. Now, in order to think creatively about getting to your goals, you have to have goals to begin with, right? This almost seems insultingly basic, but something that I find time and time again in Rhodes and Marshall advising is that goal formation is extraordinarily hard, even for the students who are as capable as you all are, right? Even for students who are competitive for these scholarships, they struggle to develop goals, right? And they don't direct their behavior in a goal-oriented way. That is, to me, surprising, And I think if there is a value of this process, right, that is unrelated at all to the win, it's hopefully making you better at developing goals for your life, right? It's a surprisingly challenging thing, And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I think the first is psychological, right? I think you are at the end of a process, right, that has at every turn rewarded you for doing what is expected, right? And has at no point asked you to develop your own expectations, and strive to meet those. You all are very good at meeting expectations. And throughout this Rhodes and Marshall process, many of you will work really hard to meet our expectations. You'll draft your personal statements. You'll come up with 5 things that you want to talk about in your interviews. You will do all the things that are asked of you, right? But this is a situation where doing what is asked of you is not enough, right? The thing that will separate the successful candidate from the candidate who does everything right, but who does not advance, is the person who is capable of giving themselves license to really believe in a future that is different from the one that exists right now, and to strive to realize that future, right? That's a big change in your mindset, right? And it means overcoming stuff like imposter syndrome. It means overcoming stuff like fear of rejection. It means overcoming stuff. It means embracing failure, right? At every turn, And those are psychologically difficult things to do. And they're particularly difficult for people who have been so successful for so long as you all have, right? But I think in order to have a goal, you must internalize the possibility of that goal's failure, right? And I think a reason that candidates are not willing to venture, right, are not willing to say, this is the world that I want to see, and I'm willing to move mountains to make that happen, is because as soon as you say that, you've introduced a way that you can fail, and fail dramatically, and fail consequentially, right? And I think if you want to be a successful fellowship candidate, that's something you just have to overcome. You don't have the power to realize any world that you want to see, right? But I think people are disempowered by the size and the seeming intractability of the problems that our world faces. And that stops them from dreaming small. It stops them from dreaming at all, right? So we're not asking you to dream massively, massively big, right? Again, I'm not an inspirational speaker, but what I am asking you is to dream at all. And if you are going to dream small, but consequentially, right? What is the thing that I definitely could do if I was ambitious that would make the world, a little bit more like the world I want to live in, right? What is that thing? Because there are things that exist, that you all can do that can change the world in a small, tiny way, right? And identifying those things and believing yourself enough to pursue those things is the core of having goals, of developing a mission, of developing agency, of being a successful fellowship candidate. Here I'm going to talk about an example of sort of 2 students, right? 2 modalities that I very frequently see in the advising chair and throughout the candidacy development process, right? That I think get to what I'm talking about when I'm talking about having goals and doing things, I think these 2 students, right, exemplify what I'm talking about in terms of getting into the right mindset for these fellowship applications. So the first student on the left looks very frustrated. Why is he frustrated? Okay. He's frustrated because he's ran into a sort of like totally foreseeable obstruction, right? This student maybe has sort of perfect grades, like a reasonably full resume, they've done some stuff in their issue area, they've got strong letters of recommendation, and they've put together their application, and they feel okay about it, and they don't get an interview, and that's the end of the path for them, right? And they experience sort of some frustration, right? I see this every year, right? There's students who reach the end of the path and experience that frustration, But I think what's curious is that the students who are most frustrated at the end of this process are the students who behaved least like actually winning was their real ambition. So let's look at the student on the left, right? The stock image photo of this imaginary student, okay? This student was in the same situation, right? They got to a semifinalist interview, right, in their Rhodes constituency, okay? And they didn't make it. And they had worked hard to get to that point, right? They're in the same situation as that student, okay? But instead of feeling the defeat, right, what they do is they widen their option space. They think agentically, they think in a goal-oriented way. Okay, this didn't work out this time. Okay, why didn't it work out? Maybe because I don't have a sufficient claim to my constituency, right? I'm applying to an outside the US constituency, and there's a sort of way in which I need to be connected to that constituency in order to win one of the limited scholarships that they're dispersing, okay? Maybe I'm simply not credentialed enough, right? Maybe I don't have enough connections in the UK, okay? Well, so what am I going to do? I'm going to win another nationally competitive scholarship, right? And go and complete one master's degree doing that, right? Off the back of that, I'm going to apply to a UK university, win an internal scholarship, go there. I'm going to go to the country. I'm going to develop relationships with the people in the program that I want to go to. Okay. I'm going to talk to every past winner from my constituency, right? Because they're going to be my interviewers. They're going to be the people appraising my application. I'm going to talk to all of them, or at least I'm going to reach out to all of them, right? I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to make sure that they know my face. I'm going to make sure that they know what I'm about. I'm going to make sure that I get from them everything that they're willing to tell me about the process of applying, right? I'm going to, on this new fellowship that I'm on, make sure I develop deep relationships with professors who can write me really strong letters of recommendation that have some connection to the program that I want to go to, right? I don't think I performed very well in the Rhodes Social. That's something that you'll learn about, right? The Rhodes has, as a part of their interview weekend, you have to go to a cocktail party and basically perform, right? For a lot of students, it's the hardest thing that they have to do in the whole process, right? Some people love it, right? But for a lot of people, it's the hardest thing that they have to do in the whole process, right? And a lot of students are just dispirited by the social. It's really hard to train for, right? It's something that we have extremely limited capacity to train you for, right? And so a lot of students fumble the social, right? But this student doesn't. This student on the right is like, I know I'm going to suck at the social, right? So what can I do that will basically emulate the social? Okay, well, I'm at, a UK university. They have formal dinners all the time. They have formal dinners every week. I'm going to get an invitation to a formal dinner every week until I have to go to this Rhodes Social again, right? And make sure that I, might as well have gone to, like etiquette school. I might as well have been born into the British aristocracy for how well I can conduct myself at a formal, right? I'm going to go to a social every week until I'm not worried at all about what this is like, right? I'm gonna do all of these things. Oh, the Rhodes didn't think I had enough of sort of like artsy side. I'm gonna pick up photography. I'm gonna like schedule a gallery show, right? I'm gonna go to sort of like Fiji and take photos of the effects of climate change, and then I'm gonna display those photos at a gallery show in DC. I'm gonna call myself a photographer, right? Like all of those things this student is going to do, and they're gonna come back and they're gonna win the scholarship, right? Any of those things, student one also could have done, right? And in fact, maybe student one, even on paper, the first year looked more competitive than student two, right? But student two at the end of the day is walking away with the win. Why? Because they were willing to be agentic, because they were willing to be goal-oriented, because they were willing to do whatever it took to win, right? To go out of their way and to go above and beyond and to widen their option space and to think through how you can approach winning from all angles. And they were able to go from maybe behind student one, not getting a final interview, to getting a final interview and winning the scholarship, right? Everything that I said just now has, at least to some student, happened, right? And frequently every year, there are students who take student two's path and there are students who take student one path, right? And something that I don't know how to do in advising, I don't know how to do once the ball is rolling, is push people more towards student two, right? Because I think that there's always more you can do, right? If you think broadly about what it will actually take to accomplish your goals. And too often, right, I run into cases of student one. So if there's one thing that I want to leave you with today, right? If there's one thing that I could exhort you to do, right, it would be to be like student two, I don't know if my advice on being more agentic is helpful. Maybe it resonated, maybe it didn't. But if it didn't resonate, then find advice that does resonate. Find advice that does enable you to be this kind of goal-oriented person, right? This kind of mission-led person. And it will pay dividends in the forms of scholarships, one, but primarily in the form of sort of like impact had. I think what the scholarships are selecting for above everything else, right, is people who are going to have an impact. And it's not the scholarship that enables you to have the impact, right? The people that they want to select are the people who are going to have an impact anyway. And they want to attach their name to those people because that raises their profile, in every Rhodes class, in every Marshall class, in every PD Soros Fellowship class, right? There will be those students who, by accomplishing what they always would have accomplished anyway, grant the scholarships their prestige upon which they can market to the next generation, right? And there are students who are simply just striving as a terminal goal to get that name at all, to get into the scholarship at all, right? If you want to be successful in this process, right? And if you want to be successful, even in the event of your failure to get internal nomination or to win one of these scholarships, then you want to be the person who would have done what they were going to do anyway, and to whom these scholarships want consequently to attach their name because it benefits them. And that is the way that you need to be thinking if you guys are going to go into this competition and going to do well, and also going to be able to accept the failure that will necessarily come. So that's the bulk of the presentation. I have no idea what time it is, but I will field questions. Okay, it's 10:50. That was longer than I expected. So thank you for listening to me talk. We'll have some time for a couple questions now. And they can be object level, like if you're just like, well, tell me a little bit more about Soros, or tell me a little bit more about, Gates Cambridge, like that's fine too. Or if you have questions about sort of like the agency mission stuff, then we can address those as well. Either way. Yeah, okay, I see a hand.
Yes, hi. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah.
I was wondering about if you had advice for students that sort of tangentially have experience in their issue area, but haven't focused their whole Georgetown experience towards that. And it's my understanding that most of these scholarships, and it makes sense, are looking for students who've kind of dedicated a lot of time to a certain issue area. But I'm curious if you have advice for students who might have gone more broadly and then kind of mid-junior year or later on in their path found exactly what they wanted to make an impact on.
Yeah, no, Isabel, that's a great question, because I think that is something that to some extent everybody feels, right? Nobody feels that they've done enough in their issue area. Some language that the Marshall has put out that I find helpful to think through this is the idea that there's three kinds of candidacies, and these are the Marshall's terms, right? They talk about a straight arrow candidacy, right? They talk about a curved candidacy, and they talk about a pivot candidacy. And they say that all of these are sort of successful candidacy modes. So a straight arrow candidacy is what you're describing, right? And you see these from time to time. Somebody, in utero conceives the idea that they want to be a gastroenterologist, right? And by the time that they're out on the table, you know what I mean? They're asking to, talk to an internist about, shadowing, right? There are students like that who have had an ambition their entire life and who see it through, and then who go to the UK and then continue to do that, right? But most students are not in that category. And that's the straight arrow category. There's also students who have had a radical departure from what they want to do, right? There is the, economist who realizes, on the final days of their senior year that their actual calling was to be a poet. And they need to throw this all away and learn Italian and translate 14th century Italian poetry, right? And that candidacy is what the Marshall refers to as a pivot. The candidacy that you're describing is probably closest to what they call a curve candidacy, right? So you have had experience that was generally in the water of, what you want to do ultimately, but you've refined that, or you've developed an interest in an adjacent area as you progressed through your college career, right? That's a curve candidacy, and the bulk of Marshall candidacies, and the bulk consequently of Marshall winners, are of this sort. And so I think there's two things that you can do, right? If you're in that situation. The first thing is to identify the thought process that led you to make the decision to pursue these new opportunities, right? And then permit that thought process to propagate itself backwards over your story, right? Most of us live our lives retrospectively, right? We're like the Klimt painting of the angel, blowing into history, you know what I mean? While looking at the storm behind us, and we only make sense of our lives as we, desperately try and throw story on top of what will inevitably be a series of accidents and incidents, But the privilege that you have as somebody who's not living their life, but writing about it for a scholarship application is you can ascribe intentionality where there was not intentionality. And you can lay out for the Marshall panel sort of the arc that led you to this in a way that makes what really for you was a departure from your previous interest seem instead like the natural progression of an interest, right? I think a place where you can exert agency in the scholarship application process is in telling your story in sort of the most parsimonious, most compelling way, right? You have the agency to do that, and that story is going to be different. It's going to be a condensed and altered version of your lived experience, right? But for the purposes of the application, you're not writing your autobiography. Well, you'll be asked to write an autobiography, but that's not what will go into the application, right? What will go into the application is the maximally charitably construed version of what you've done. And I'm sure if you've done anything at all, you can make a meal out of that. And you can make sort of an entire sort of tectonic plate out of that molehill, right? The other thing that you can do is, and this is what Marshall encourages, right, is emphasize the experience that you still need, and play up the interdisciplinarity of what you've done so far, right? So, it's great to have the person who, by the third trimester wanted to be a gastroenterologist go on to become a gastroenterologist. That's great. But we also want some gastroenterologists who realized in college that they wanted to be gastroenterologists and who have therefore training in business, who have therefore training in classics, right? Because all of that expertise makes you have a new perspective, right? So you can play up the pivot both as a compelling need for why you need the scholarship, right? Well, I need to go to the UK because I don't have the experience, right? But what I do have is experience in this, and I think that's what the student that I was talking about earlier, right? The student who, wanted to do early educational policy was able to do, right? Really convincingly well. They were able to play up their undergraduate education in poetry and in English and emphasize the ways in which that made them really good at empathizing with people, which is a core skill of developing, any policy, and particularly any policy working with children, right? You have to be able to think from that other person's point of view. That's what they were taught to do as a poet, and that is what they're bringing to the educational field. So I think those would be two things, right? That would help you address that particular situation.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah. We have time probably for one more question if there is one.
Oh, sorry. If no one else has a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I heard that it's possible to apply for most of the UK fellowships after you graduate. Could you tell me a bit about the rules behind that? Maybe
Yeah. So all of these scholarships you can apply for after you graduate. I don't believe any that I meant. Actually, St. Andrews you have to apply for as a senior. All the other ones I mentioned today you can apply for at any point. Correct me if I'm wrong, Colleen, right? Well, not at any point, right? So for the Marshall, you have to apply within 3 years of graduating. For the Rhodes, you have to apply either before you turn 24 or within a year of graduating from your first undergraduate degree. So you have approximately 1 year post-graduation to do something that will be relevant for these scholarships. The general advice I'll give there is that these scholarships are investing in potential, right? And so it's not automatically an advantage to spend a year doing something, right? Because you'll have more experience, right? The way that they discriminate between applications is not an absolute measure, right? It's a relative measure because they're looking at, oh, well, what does it look like this person is going to do? So if you have a bird in the hand, so to speak, if you're going to go do a Fulbright, if you're going to go do something really cool for a year post-graduation, in that case, it might make sense to wait because you know that you're going to have all this really cool experience and this really cool letter of recommendation that's going to go in your packet that's going to make you a stronger applicant, like 10 times stronger, right? Then it might make sense to wait. But I would say for most people, right, who are uncertain about what they're going to do post-grad, it makes sense to just apply now, to go through the process, to ask for those rec letters, right? And then if it doesn't work out this year, you can always apply multiple times, right? The only limitation on that is Rhodes. Rhodes only lets you go up twice. But even with Rhodes, you know, because you only have 1 year of postgraduate eligibility, if you're a senior, then you might as well shoot your shot this year, right? If you were a junior, then I would say, and actually you are a junior, Isabel, right? If you were a junior, then there might be a cause to wait for Rhodes. But also what you could do is apply this year, go through the process in the event of your selection for internal nomination, go through all the candidacy development program, right? Really think about, well, what is my mission in life? What do I want to do? What are the things that I want to accomplish, right? Do all this really, I think, valuable development work, and then refrain at the end from applying. I had a question in an advising meeting recently. Well, would the CRF be okay with that? Like, doesn't that hurt your sort of like numbers? The thing I'll close on, because we're at time, is that ultimately what we're in the business of is the second half of this application, right? We're in the business of empowering you guys to do the things that you want to do, right? If we choose you for internal nomination, believe in you, right? I mean, I believe in all of you right now, right? But if we make an investment in you, that is not an investment with an expectation of a specific return from you, right? If we choose you for internal nomination, we are not contractually obligating you to apply for Rhodes and to go to, you know, Oxford for 2 years and to, you know, like, you know, drink stuff out of a shoe or something, right? Like, you know, all we're asking is that, you know, you be really thoughtful about your next steps, right? And that you put in some time to figuring out what that best next step is going to be. So if you go through the candidacy development process and realize that you want to wait, we're totally cool with that. And 9 times out of 10, we're like, if you're making that decision, then we're going to be like, okay, well, that's advisable. Like, you know, you should do that. Hold off, come back next year, right? Like, let's talk about next steps, you know? We're ultimately on your side. We're not on the number side, you know? We're on the side of getting you to the place that you want to go. So I always encourage people to just apply, at least for internal nomination, because I think our process is extraordinarily valuable. And regardless of whether or not you end up going the full way, you know, we're going to support you. So that's what I would say. I would say apply at least for internal nomination. And then maybe if you're young, if you're on the junior side, there might be a reason to hold off for Rhodes. But for most scholarships, I just say apply, 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 apply. Apply as much as possible, fail as much as possible, and that's how you get to the win. All right, guys. That brings us to time. Thank you so much. Thank you for Colleen for fielding the chat. Thank you all guys for coming. This has been a kind of preview. This was like a weirdly timed session, but we're about to get into it, guys. I'm so excited. You guys have the information session tomorrow night, you know, or later in the week. And then things are going to be coming fast and heavy, man. So I hope you're ready for it. This is the most exciting time of the year for all of us, and we're really excited to get on the train. Terrific, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to pause the recording.